Hello, everybody, and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. My name is Don Arlett. Well, the first 2 weeks of the 4 years of Donald Trump's presidency have passed, and already a great deal has happened. The U.S. president is making headlines around the world for instituting tariffs, among others. So what is Trump trying to achieve? We will try to answer that together with our guest, Tomasz Włostowski, managing partner at EU Strategies. Hello, Tomasz, and thank you very much for joining us here on World Talks.
Hello, it's good to be here.
Yes, now remembering Donald Trump's, let's go back to his first presidency. We've heard this line before, and remembering Donald Trump's policies from his first term, can we draw any lessons or conclusions to help us here and now?
Well, absolutely. I think the key sort of lesson learned from his first term is that there's going to be a lot of chaos. There's going to be a lot of commotion. There's going to be a lot of trade disruptive talk. There's going to be talk of tariffs. But then at the end of the day, if you sort of look at what he has actually accomplished in his last term, it wasn't that much, actually. I mean, he threatened tariffs against Mexico and Canada last time around. He renegotiated NAFTA. But if you sort of look exactly into the details of how that renegotiation went, you learn that there wasn't that much that was changed. Yes, there were some technical changes to NAFTA, but it wasn't sort of a groundbreaking major revision of NAFTA. Same thing happened with Korea. He withdrew or interrupted the Korea-US FTA. He renegotiated little parts of that agreement, and it was signed again. So basically what's happening is Trump is making a lot of commotion about changing the terms of trade and changing the patterns of trade. So there's a lot of narrative around it. But in terms when you look at the details of what actually happens, there's not that much. Same thing would happen with China last time around. There were massive tariffs on China. There was a lot of retaliation from China. He was supposed to, eliminate the U.S. trade deficit with China. The Chinese committed to some sort of concessions. There was the phase one agreement with China. Did they actually deliver? No. Did the trade imbalance disappear? No. So actually, again, it takes me to my first point. There's going to be a lot of chaos, a lot of talk, a lot of threats. But at the end of the day, not a lot is going to change in terms of trade.
So a lot of blunder and less bluff. Now, concerning Europe, we don't know the details of potential tariffs that he may want to place on Europe, but we did hear him say how Europe is treating the United States so badly. What do you think it is that Donald Trump is going to try and achieve? Do you think that the trade, that there may be a little thread in there tied to defense? Or are there some serious unfair trade practices that Donald Trump wants to undo?
Well, look, I mean, of course, there are always, substantive policy issues and trade policy undermining any trade relationship. So if Trump really, really wanted to get to the details of trade policy, of course, there are massive distortions in Europe. There are also massive distortions in the United States. There's a lot of subsidies in Europe going to green industries, as there are in the United States. There are a lot of subsidies in farming in Europe, as there are in the United States. So there is a lot of distortions. But again, I don't think Donald Trump is actually, sort of trade policy wonk that is going to go into the details of trade policy and try to eliminate, specific policies in Europe. I do think, however, that he probably needs some major win that he can talk about. Whether it's an actual win in terms of sort of details, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that he gets something that he can portray to his electorate, that he can portray in the media as a win. We've seen that with Colombia, just 2 weeks ago or a week ago. We've seen that with Mexico and with Canada just a few days ago, where he received some token concessions that allowed him to sort of delay the imposition of tariffs. We'll see how that plays out because of course we don't know fully whether he will actually suspend the tariffs or if they're going to come in anyway. But he's already scored some little things that he can portray as major wins.
Right, and do you think that's part of his strategy here, trying to appeal to the electorate and trying to say, look, I've already got 10,000 Mexican soldiers going to the border, so we're going to wait a little while on these tariffs, and that this is more of a strategy of bullying more really than anything else?
Well, I don't. Well, okay, I'm not going to get into whether it's bullying or not, but it's definitely a strategy of, appearing strong, appearing decisive, appearing, not afraid to ripple the feathers and to make any waves. I mean, he's clearly showing, for his internal politics that he's not afraid to make bold moves. Now, I think the key question is what exactly is his deliverable from Europe, and I think this is what you're getting at. We know that with Mexico and with Canada, the official, he's been talking about a trade imbalance, how United States has been treated fairly by these trade partners. But when he actually threatened to impose tariffs, it wasn't really based on any trade imbalances. It was actually based on national security related to the opium crisis in the United States and the contraband of opioids and fentanyl. So he's using sort of a national security concept to introduce tariffs because he needs a legal authority to introduce the tariffs, right? In the US, the president cannot introduce tariffs by himself. He needs a statutory authority. And Trump has used sort of the national security aspects of the drug epidemic in the United States to justify the tariffs for Mexico and Canada. We don't know how he's going to deal with Europe. I mean, is he going to use some of the trade laws and actually impose tariffs claiming trade imbalances with Europe? Or again, is he going to use some national security aspects? The war in Ukraine and complaining that Europe doesn't contribute sufficiently to defense of NATO? Or is he going to use Greenland and say, look, I want Greenland, so here are punitive tariffs on Denmark and a couple of other countries? We don't know how he's going to justify it, and it makes it difficult for us to sort of gauge how Europe can respond and accommodate his concerns.
Well, one thing is that President Trump overinflated for Americans the trade, I guess, imbalance between the EU and the U.S., saying that there was a $350 billion trade deficit with the EU. That's obviously not true. The trade deficit for the United States with the EU is around $80 billion. So let's maybe start there. How can the two sides come together to try and reduce that trade deficit for the United States? And would that potentially satisfy, or at least give Trump enough ammunition to claim victory?
Well, I think what's going to give Trump ammunition to claim victory are some promises from Europeans to address the trade imbalance and address his concerns. Again, so it takes us back to the previous point. If he justifies the tariffs for some national security, defense-related things, European commitment to buy more of American weapons and American military equipment. We know that in Europe right now there's a major discussion on increasing defense spending. There was just a meeting, the European Council met just yesterday to discuss how to fund and how to increase the spending on defense. So that's obviously a quick win. I mean, most of European countries want to buy American defense equipment anyway, so that's a quick win. That's number one. Energy. Trump is very big on gas, natural gas, oil, fossil fuels. Europe is not that big on fossil fuels, but it's big on replacing Russian gas with American LNG. That's another quick win. So, even those two things alone are already sort of an indications of where Europe can go in giving the Trump the mandate or the space to claim victory by making promises to buy more of American gas and American weapons.
Yes. Now, if we look at Europe's response and how it potentially may deal with a trade war with the United States, let's just go ahead and listen to Ursula von der Leyen, who made this statement just yesterday, I believe.
I want to be clear. Europe will safeguard its economic and national security. But it is important that we strike the right balance. One that places emphasis on the positive tools of economic statecraft, such as trade, investment, innovation, and production. We want to avoid a global race to the bottom that is in no one's interest. That has to be our primary focus, even as we prepare for all possible scenarios.
First question here is, what sticks does Europe have in combating Trump putting some kind of blanket tariffs or and as Ursula von der Leyen has said, treating Europe unfairly?
Well, look, I mean, Europe can, Europe is an economic and trade superpower. It actually is. So, the volume of trade between the United States and Europe is massive. So if Europe really wanted to retaliate massively against the United States, it has the means to do so. However, there is actually no appetite at all to do that for a number of reasons. One is, of course, the defense cooperation with the United States, the war with Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. So obviously, there's no appetite in Europe to actually use any of the massive means it has to retaliate. So, the narrative that comes from Brussels, I think, is correct. What they're trying to do is appease President Trump. They're trying to talk about, the massive cooperation we already have. They're making it very clear that, okay, even among friends, there are minor disagreements. We can discuss. We're open to discussing. We can accommodate some concerns you have. And then, there's always that threat where they say, well, but however, if you get too crazy, we have the means to retaliate and we're not going to use it. Now, there is, of course, a good question. It's a good question whether Europe can actually sort of mobilize the required political support to retaliate strongly against the United States. And this is because whatever the Commission proposes, that needs to get approved by the member states in the council. They would have to authorize such retaliation. And we already know that most member states, they don't really want a tariff war with the United States. And they're probably willing to give President Trump some slack, cut him some slack, allow him maybe some, more sort of not to address it, eye for eye, to try to find a way to de-escalate the conflict, to make some promises, find the avenues where we can cooperate, see where we can address the trade imbalance, and try to sort of move into other topics. And there's also this not concern, but there's this thought in Brussels that President Trump has short sort of attention span. So right now he's fighting Brussels, but probably in 3 months from now, he's going to be occupied with something else. So we just need to survive the next few weeks once he loses his focus, and then we're sort of smooth sailing for the next 4 years.
Ursula von der Leyen used a phrase to avoid the race, to avoid a global race to the bottom. And I'm thinking right now also about two other executive orders that were issued by Donald Trump recently. One was taking the United States out of the Paris Agreement, and the other is taking the United States out of what Biden had agreed to as the global minimum corporate income tax. How significant are these two issues when it comes to U.S.-EU relations?
Well, these are actually, I think, the dark clouds on the horizon. I mean, both of these two issues they're important for the United States and they're important for Europe. And this is pretty much where the interests, I think, completely diverge. On climate, it's obvious that President Trump is, very unhappy with the climate regulations, adopted under the Biden administration, but he's also very unhappy with what Europe is doing. And American business in general is very unhappy with sort of the green climate legislation in Europe. However, on this topic, Europe is in a position where it itself is debating whether it's taken the Green Deal too far. So Trump's arrival is actually catching Brussels in a very awkward moment where there are internal discussions of whether we have gone too far on the Green Deal and the climate legislation, and at the same time, there's probably going to be massive pressure from the United States, from American business to lessen a European regulation on climate as it applies to American exports. So this is a potential difficult sort of topic that Trump can actually, well, to put it bluntly, he can exploit this division even within the United States, even without the European Union, to try to advance American interests. And then on the sort of taxing U.S. multinationals, that's also another topic that's very important on the one hand for the United States and on the other hand for Europe, and the interests are completely diverging. So I think this is the black scenario of the upcoming trade dispute where Donald Trump links the tariffs to these two issues, and in that situation, I think we should be quite pessimistic about the ability to resolve it quickly.
Well, I mentioned at the beginning of this discussion that we're only 2 weeks in of a very long 4 years. My guest today was Tomasz Włostowski, Managing Partner at EU Strategies. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And that concludes this edition of World Talks. Thank you for watching, and stay with us for more here on TVP World.